This is the difference between people who build real wealth and people dot who work their entire lives and end up with almost nothing. Your intelligence has nothing to do with it, and neither does how hard you work. Everything comes down to how you think. Most people think like employees, trading time for money in the same endless loop. They show up, do what they're told, collect a paycheck, go home, and repeat that cycle for 6 years until they look around wondering why they have nothing to show for it except a worn out body and a modest pension that inflation keeps eating alive. The people who actually build wealth operate with a completely different mental framework because they think like owners. And today I'm going to show you exactly what that means, why it matters, and how you can start making this shift regardless of your current situation. Something needs to be clear from the start. No stock tips are coming, and I'm not going to give you some hot investment that will make you rich by next Tuesday. Wrong place for that kind of thing. What I'm going to give you is far more valuable, a way of thinking that will change your financial trajectory for the rest of your life if you actually adopt it. But here's the thing, some of what I'm about to say will be uncomfortable. You might recognize yourself in these descriptions and realize you've been making the same mistakes for decades. Good, because that discomfort marks the beginning of change. A fundamental question that most people never bother to ask themselves is this: why do you want money in the first place? Most people, if they're honest, want money so they can buy things. A nicer car, a bigger house, expensive vacations, designer clothes, status symbols that impress their neighbors and make them feel successful. And that's precisely why they stay poor. Warren Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway spent decades thinking about this question, and his answer was different from most people's. His words should be burned into your memory. I had a considerable passion to get rich, not because I wanted Ferraris. I wanted the independence. I desperately wanted it. Listen that again. Not Ferraris, not status, not impressing anyone. Independence. His goal was to become independent. Like the economist John Maynard Keynes, consumption wasn't the point. Freedom was the point. The freedom to think and act without answering to anyone else's decisions. The freedom to say no to things that didn't make sense. The freedom to walk away from people and situations that wasted his time. This is the first shift you need to make in your thinking. Stop viewing wealth as a means to buy more stuff and start viewing it as a means to buy your freedom. When you think about it this way, everything changes. Every dollar you spend on something you don't need isn't just a dollar gone. It's a piece of your freedom traded away for a momentary pleasure. Every dollar you save and invest isn't just money in an account. It's a brick in the foundation of your independence. Most people never make this mental shift. Working to consume, consuming to feel better about working, and wondering why they're trapped on a treadmill going nowhere. Now, we need to talk about the careerist trap, because this is where most intelligent, hardworking people go completely wrong. A certain type of person exists in the corporate world. Smart, ambitious, working long hours, playing political games, climbing the ladder, getting promotions, landing the corner office. They think they're winning, but they're not winning. They're just employees with better titles. Problem with thinking like a careerist is that you become so focused on advancing within someone else's system that you forget to ask whether the system itself serves your interests. You optimize for promotions instead of ownership, for salary increases instead of equity, for looking good to your boss instead of building something that belongs to you. The advice that's stuck with successful investors over decades is simple. You never want to be a careerist so much that you don't see it from the owner's point of view. Think about what this really means. When you're a careerist, you're asking how to get ahead, how to impress your superiors, how to get the next raise. When you think like an owner, completely different questions come up, like what actually creates value here, what the economics of this business look like, whether you'd be happy with how things are being run if you own this company. A careerist sees a cost-cutting measure and thinks about whether it will make them look good to the boss. An owner thinks about whether it will actually improve the business or just sacrifice long-term value for short-term numbers that look good in a report. A careerist sees a new project and thinks about how to position themselves to take credit for it. An owner thinks about whether the project makes economic sense and what the return on invested capital looks like. This difference in thinking is subtle, but its effects compound over decades. The careerist ends up with a resume full of impressive-sounding titles and very little actual wealth, while the owner-thinker ends up understanding how value is really created, not, and eventually finds ways to capture some of that value for themselves. A concrete example of how this plays out in the real world involves someone who started their career as a lawyer in California in the late scissors, earning about $1,000 per year. Not sembai adjusted for inflation. That's still a modest salary by any measure. This person could have thought like a careerist climbing the law firm ladder, making partner, billing more hours, buying a nicer house, joining the country club. That's the conventional path, and it leads to a comfortable upper middle class life where you trade your time for money until you're too old to enjoy whatever you've accumulated. Instead, this person thought like an owner, asking himself how he could move from selling his time to owning assets that generate returns while he sleeps. Real estate development became his first partnership with others, and an investment of about e-bide in an apartment project near Caltech during the Leckersers led to a 500 Sibite profit when that project sold. Why Bala Lincoln came back from that single investment. The pattern continued, and over 5 projects he accumulated E.C million, a substantial fortune at the time. Then he used that capital to start an investment partnership, and that's where the owner mentality really paid off. Annual returns of 37% from 1992to 1996came from his partnership. Compare that to the 500 Wu the Dow Jones returned over the same period. How did he do it? Not by working harder, not by being smarter than everyone else, but by thinking like an owner, asking where capital could be put to work in ways that generate exceptional returns. Being patient, waiting for the right opportunities instead of constantly trading. This is the path that eventually led to Berkshire Hathaway and one of the greatest wealth-building partnerships in history. But here's the part most people miss. None of this happened overnight. The path from $1,000 a year to billions took decades and required patience that most people simply don't have. And that brings me to the most important psychological difference between people who build wealth and people who don't. Deferred gratification. Some research should terrify you if you're not good at this. Psychologists conducted experiments with young children, offering them a choice. You can have 1 marshmallow now, or if you wait 4 minutes, you can have 2 marshmallows. Some children grabbed the marshmallow immediately, while others found ways to distract themselves and wait for the bigger reward. Here's what's disturbing. When researchers followed up with these children decades later, the ones who could defer gratification were dramatically more successful in almost every measure. Better grades, better careers, better relationships, better health, more wealth. The ability to give up something good now for something better later turned out to be one of the most powerful predictors of life success ever discovered. And the uncomfortable truth is that most adults are still grabbing the marshmallow. They buy the car they can't afford because they want it now. Spend their bonus instead of investing it because the dopamine hit of consumption feels good now. Choose the job that pays more today over the one that offers equity and a shot at real wealth tomorrow. Every time you choose immediate consumption over delayed investment, you're being the kid who grabbed the marshmallow and the dot. Compound interest math works against you instead of for you. The good news is that this is partly learnable. Yes, some people seem naturally wired for deferred gratification. But you can develop this muscle through practice by making deferred gratification your default mode rather than an occasional discipline. One of the most successful investors of the past century described his own practice at the age of Jolt. I'm still doing it now that I'm old. I buy these apartment houses to give me something to do. It's all deferred gratification. We're looking for opportunities to defer, and other people are looking for ways to enjoy. It's a different way of going at life. Then he said something that should really make you think. You get more enjoyment out of life doing it my way than theirs. Let that sink in. Deferred gratification isn't just better strategy, it's actually more enjoyable when done right. You get the satisfaction of watching your assets compound, the peace of mind that comes from financial security, and the freedom that comes from not being desperate for your next paycheck. Meanwhile, the instant gratifiers stay stuck on the hedonic treadmill, always needing the next hit, never satisfied, perpetually anxious about their finances. Now, we need to talk about the actual mechanics of building wealth because this is simpler than most people make it. A formula that has stood the test of time goes like this: spend less than you earn, invest shrewdly. Avoid toxic people and toxic activities, keep learning all of your life, do a lot of deferred gratification. That's the whole formula. Doing those 5 things consistently over decades means you're almost certain to succeed. Skip them and you're going to need a lot of luck, and you don't want to need luck. You want to play a game where you're very likely to win without depending on it. Each element deserves a breakdown because the devil is in the details. Spending less than you earn sounds obvious, but look around at how people actually live. Because they can't afford get financed credit card debt at 5% spot interest gets carried. Houses at the top of their budget get bought because the bank said they qualified. Eating out happens constantly because cooking feels like work. Then they wonder why they can't get ahead. The math here is ruthless and unforgiving. Spending more than you earn means you're going backwards. Spending exactly what you earn means you're standing still. Only spending less than you earn creates the surplus that can be invested and compounded. One successful investor's grandfather understood this perfectly. He underspent his income all his life not to live miserably, but to ensure his widow would be provided for. This wasn't sacrifice, it was responsibility and long-term thinking. Investing shrewdly doesn't mean investing brilliantly or picking winning stocks or finding the next Amazon. It means investing shrewdly. And shrewd investing is mostly about not being stupid. For most people, this means buying index funds and sitting on your ass. That's literally the advice from some of the greatest investors in history. If you're not going to put in the work to understand individual businesses deeply, don't pretend you can pick stocks better than the market. Just buy the whole market and wait. The math here is interesting. Only about 500 woo of people can reliably beat index funds over the long term. If you're not in that 500 woo, and statistically you're probably not, trying to beat the market is just an expensive form of entertainment. Avoiding toxic people and toxic activities is underrated. The people you spend time with shape your thinking. Surrounding yourself with people who think like employees, who complain about their circumstances, who blame others for their problems, who make excuses means you will absorb their thinking. The advice here is blunt. The great lesson of life is get them the hell out of your life and do it fast. Fast, not eventually, not when it's convenient, fast. Toxic people drain your energy, waste your time, and poison your thinking. Every hour spent with someone going nowhere is an hour you could have spent learning, building, or just being peaceful. Learning all of your life might be the most important element because it compounds like money does. A statement worth memorizing. Wisdom acquisition is a moral duty. It's not something you do just to advance in life. Most people stop learning the day they leave school, thinking education is something you complete like a checklist item. Got the degree, done learning. This is insane. The world keeps changing, your competitors keep learning, and the opportunities keep shifting. If you're not getting smarter every day, you're falling behind. Another observation worth noting, I constantly see people rise in life who are not the smartest. Sometimes not even the most diligent, but they are learning machines. They go to bed every night a little wiser than when they got up. And boy, does that help, particularly when you have a long run ahead of you. Learning machines, that's what you need to become a little smarter every day, vastly smarter over decades. How do you do this? You read constantly, you read widely. One famous observation puts it this way. In my whole life, I have known no wise people who didn't read all the time. None. Zero. Not some wise people, not most wise people, no wise people who didn't read all the time. If you're not reading, you're not going to become wise, period. Now, here's an angle that most people completely miss about building wealth, and it might be the most valuable thing you hear today. You don't have to be brilliant to get rich, you just have to not be crazy. Listen to this carefully. If you're just not crazy, you have a big advantage over 500 you of the people. Most people have all kinds of crazy patches. If you're just consistently not crazy, you get a big advantage in life. Think about what this means. 500 war of your competition is handicapped by their own craziness, their emotional reactions, their biases, their envy, their impatience, their self-destructive habits. If you can just be consistently rational, not brilliant, not inspired, just rational, you're already ahead of almost everyone. This changes the game completely. You don't have to find the next Apple, don't have to time the market perfectly, don't have to be smarter than Warren Buffett. You just have to not do stupid things. Inversion offers a better approach. Instead of asking how to get rich, ask what are all the ways people go broke and then don't do those things. People go broke by spending more than they earn. Don't do that. People go broke by taking excessive risks with money they can't afford to lose. Don't do that. People go broke by marrying the wrong person and going through a catastrophic divorce. Be very careful about that. People go broke by letting ego drive their decisions. Check your ego. People go broke by being impatient and trying to get rich quick. Be patient. People go broke by following the crowd into speculative manners. Don't follow the crowd. Avoiding the common ways people destroy themselves financially will leave you wealthy almost by default because most of your competition will self-destruct along the way. The first e-bite Ling needs to be discussed because this is the hardest part that nobody wants to talk about. The blunt truth, the first e-bite Ling is but you got to do it. I don't care what you have to do. If it means walking everywhere and not eating anything that wasn't purchased with a coupon, find a way to get your hands on e-bite Ling. After that, you can ease off the gas a little bit. Why is the first e-bite Ling so important? Compounding explains it. Compound interest is one of the most powerful forces in economics, but it needs a base to work on. 500 sure of nothing is nothing. 500 sure of ealing is e-bite. It's nice, but not life-changing. 10% of 100 is 10. And now we're talking. The first e-bite Ling is brutal because you're pushing a boulder up a hill with almost no help from compounding. All the work comes from you, from your savings, from your sacrifices, from your discipline. But once you get over that hump, compounding starts doing more and more of the work for you. Your money starts making money, and that money makes more money. The boulder starts rolling downhill instead of uphill. This is why the wealthy get wealthier and the poor stay poor. It's not because the system is rigged, though it often is. It's because compounding requires a base, and most people never build that base because they're too busy consuming. The first rule of compounding, never interrupt it unnecessarily. Every time you dip into your investments for a vacation, for a car upgrade, for a kitchen remodel, you're interrupting the compounding. You're resetting the clock, pushing the boulder back up the hill. Wealthy people understand this and let the compounding continue uninterrupted for decades. Poor people can't help themselves. They see money and they spend it. Concentration versus diversification needs to be discussed because this is where conventional wisdom is completely wrong. Every financial advisor will tell you to diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Own lots of different stocks. Buy mutual funds that hold hundreds of companies. This advice is fine if you want average returns, but it's terrible if you want to build real wealth. Here's what smart investors actually think. What is interesting is that in wealth management, a lot of people think that if they have e-bet stocks, they're investing more professionally than they are if they have 4 or 5. I regard this as insanity, absolute insanity, absolute insanity. Strong language, but it's backed by logic. Owning 100 stocks makes it impossible to understand any of them deeply. You're spreading yourself so thin that you're basically just owning the market, but paying more fees and doing more work. The term for this is diversification. You're not diversifying, you're making yourself worse, a more sensible approach. I'm way more comfortable owning 2 or 3 stocks, which I think I know something about, and where I think I have an advantage. 2 or 3 stocks, not 2 or Sambyte.2 or 3 that you actually understand. Of course, this only works if you're willing to put in the work to really understand those businesses. If you're not, then yes, buy the index fund, Alamdia. But if you are willing to do the work, concentration makes more sense than dilution. One family portfolio that generated enormous returns over decades consisted of just a handful of positions. Berkshire Hathaway stock, Costco stock, some Chinese stocks through a trusted fund manager, a small amount of Daily Journal stock, and a bunch of apartment buildings. That's it, not 100 positions, not constant trading, just a few things understood deeply and held for decades. And the honest assessment. Do I think that's perfect? No. Do I think it's okay? Yes. You're lucky if you got 4 good assets. If you're trying to do better than average, you're lucky if you have 4 things to buy. You're lucky if you have 4 good things to buy, not C/4. Here's something most people get wrong about getting rich. They think it's about the buying and the selling. It's not. The big money is not in the buying or the selling, but in the waiting. The waiting, that's where the real money gets made. Most people can't wait. They buy something, it goes up a little, they sell. They buy something, it goes down a little, they panic and sell. Constant trading, constant doing something, constant portfolio checking. All this activity feels productive, feels like being responsible, like managing money properly, but it's actually destroying returns. Every trade costs commissions, every realized gain costs taxes. Every switch from one investment to another is a bet that the new thing will outperform the old thing. And statistically, you're probably wrong. The people who make real money in investing find a few great opportunities and then sit back and wait for years, for decades, through market crashes, through recessions, through periods when everyone else is panicking. They don't interrupt the compounding. Don't mistake activity for progress. They wait. A specific example, a $4 million investment in a candy company back in Ichen Jolbai T-shirt R has since generated over $1 billion in pre-tax profits while requiring only 6 million in total capital over all those years. How did that happen? Not through brilliant trading, not through clever timing, but through buying a wonderful business at a fair price and then waiting for decades. Or another example, a Urbex Sensors million-yuan investment in an electric vehicle company in Artenlingba peaked at $2.2 billion. Again, not through trading, through waiting. The big money is in the waiting, but waiting is boring. Waiting is hard. Waiting requires faith in your original analysis, while the whole world tells you that you're wrong. This is why most people can't do it. Something you might be thinking right now needs to be addressed. You might be thinking that this all sounds great, but you're not 4 years old anymore. You don't have decades ahead of you to compound, and you're wondering if it's too late. Here's the honest answer. It's harder now than it used to be. A realistic assessment of the current environment, I think it's going to be way harder for young people today to get rich than it was when I was young. Interest rates have been low for years, which means returns on safe investments are lower. Asset prices are higher. The easy money has been made, but harder doesn't mean impossible. And there are still advantages that come with age and experience. First, you probably have more capital to start with than a 4-year-old. That first betling that's so hard to accumulate, you might already have it or you might be closer than you think. Second, you have experience. You've seen business cycles, you've seen what works and what doesn't. You've accumulated knowledge that compounds just like money does. Third, you have less time to make stupid mistakes. When you're Ursawal, you can recover from a big mistake. When you're Ustawal, the stakes are higher, which means you might actually be more careful. The question isn't whether the game is harder now. The game is always harder than we want it to be. The question is whether you're going to play or not. And here's the thing. Even if you can't become fabulously wealthy at this point, you can still become more wealthy than you are now. You can still build independence, still reduce your dependence on your job, on your employer, on circumstances outside your control. The owner mentality is valuable at any age. Even if you're lichtas years old and plan to work another years, you can think like an owner during those years. You can save more, invest smarter, stop interrupting your compounding, give up the instant gratifications that are keeping you poor. The best time to plant a tree was, years ago. The second best time is now. Something practical to do with all of this is needed because philosophy without action is just entertainment. Here's what I want you to do after this video ends. First, calculate your net worth. Most people have no idea what they're actually worth. A vague sense exists that there's some money in retirement accounts and some equity in the house, but they've never sat down and added it all up, subtracted debts, and arrived at a real number. Do this today before you go to sleep tonight. Write down every asset you have and every liability you owe. Calculate the difference. That's your starting point. Second, calculate your savings rate. What percentage of your income are you actually keeping? Not what you think you're saving, not what you intend to save, but what you're actually saving. If that number is 0 or negative, you have an emergency. You are going backwards, getting poorer every month. Something has to change immediately. If that number is positive but small, say under 500 sir, you're treading water. You might end up okay if nothing goes wrong, but something usually goes wrong. You need a bigger margin of safety. If that number is 500 serve or more, you're making progress. Keep going and don't get complacent. Third, look at your social circle. This is uncomfortable but necessary. Who do you spend most of your time with? Do they think like owners or like employees? Do they talk about building wealth or about consuming? Do they encourage your ambitions or mock them? If you're surrounded by people who think like employees, who live paycheck to paycheck, who see ambition as something to be embarrassed about, you need to change your environment. This doesn't mean abandoning old friends, but it does mean adding new influences. Find people who think the way you want to think. Fourth, make a learning plan. What books are you going to read this year? What skills are you going to develop? What areas of knowledge are you going to deepen? If you don't have answers to these questions, you're not a learning machine, you're stagnating. And in a changing world, stagnation is the same as decline. Fifth, and this is the hardest one, identify one major expense you can eliminate or dramatically reduce. Not a small expense, a major one. The car payment eating up Y by day month, you could be investing the house that's too big and too expensive. The lifestyle creep that has you spending more every year, even though your happiness hasn't increased. Find one big thing and cut it. Not to punish yourself, not to live miserably, but to accelerate your path to independence, to build that capital base faster, to get the compounding working for you instead of against you. I want to close with something that might seem paradoxical. Everything I've told you today is about building wealth, about thinking like an owner, about deferred gratification and compounding and avoiding stupidity. But the goal isn't wealth for its own sake. The goal is freedom. The goal is to reach a point where you don't have to work for someone you don't respect, where you don't have to take orders from people making worse decisions than you would make, where you can say no to things that don't make sense, where you can spend your time on what matters to you. Wealthy investors who've made billions could have stopped working decades ago. They didn't need more money, but they kept working because they loved what they did, because they were free, because nobody could tell them what to do. That's what you're really working toward, not the money, the freedom the money provides. And here's the final insight I want to leave you with. If you do the things I've outlined today, spend less than you earn, invest shrewdly, avoid toxic people, keep learning, defer gratification, you are almost certain to succeed, not likely to succeed, almost certain. The path isn't complicated, the formula isn't secret, the knowledge is freely available. What most people lack isn't information, it's discipline, it's patience, it's the ability to consistently do the right things when the wrong things feel so much better in the moment. You now know what you need to know. The question is whether you'll do it, whether you'll think like an owner instead of an employee, whether you'll defer gratification instead of consuming, whether you'll invest in your freedom instead of your lifestyle. The choice is yours, and you'll live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of your life. Choose wisely,